All right. Now that we got that set up. All right. So the first definition we got to make sure we're all on board with. Sprung weight versus unsprung weight. Remember, we're a real creative bunch, which is my way of saying we kind of try to keep it obvious here. What would be sprung weight? I'm just saying it out loud. The sprung weight of the vehicle. What do you think that is?
Springs.
It's the weight that the vehicle sits onto the spring. Right.
Any weight of the vehicle that the spring supports. Unsprung weight. That would be an example of it. Wheels and tires. Probably part of your brake component systems that are attached right to the wheel end. Wheel hubs. Now, control arms might be sprung, might be unsprung, depending on the way the springs are attached. Axles might be sprung, might be unsprung. Okay? What you got to look at is it that the ground's going through that control arm pushing on the spring? Or rather, is the spring kind of almost holding that up and the frame is what's attaching the spring to it? You know what I mean? It's a little bit easier when you see it, but basically what you always have to look at is the ground pushing up on that item, pushing up to the spring, or is the spring kind of supporting that item? So that's going to be sprung versus unsprung weight. What do you think makes the vehicle more stable? Having more sprung or more unsprung weight?
More sprung.
Yeah, I'd say more strongly.
Yeah, because you know how race cars are lower to the ground? I guess they have more sprung weight, because more.
Well, the lower the ground part center of gravity, but you're on the right track what you're thinking. The more sprung weight I have, the more these are doing the job at keeping everything where it ought to be so you keep control. To keep that center of gravity where I want it. Huh? Well, any car, but yes, Indy cars will do it. And again, the reason why NASCAR, IndyCar, dirt track are all different because they have to do different things. You know, NASCAR for the most part, left-hand turn, left-hand turn, left-hand turn, another left, okay? Because of that, they're going to actually set their springs up so that the right-hand side of the car, which is on the outside of all the turns, is stiffer than the inside. Because where do I want the weight? As I'm going into a left-hand turn, where's the weight of the vehicle want to go?
Right.
Right. So if I make a stiffer spring on the right side, it's going to push up and in and work my vehicle so that I'm keeping my center of gravity more middle. And if on a NASCAR, if that's all they're doing on a track, they're going to set their suspension up for that. IndyCar has to go all different directions. Their tracks go everywhere. Kind of what makes IndyCar IndyCar, okay? Because of that, they have to have a more balanced setup. But regardless of that, the physics hold true. The more sprung weight I have, the more my suspension is keeping the center of gravity where it needs to be. The more unsprung weight I have, the more the road is making me go where it wants me to go, not me controlling my center of gravity. All right, what type of spring is this? It is a coil spring. Told you, we're a creative bunch. Okay? Now, I can have a couple different types of coil springs. Do you notice on this one that the ends are actually a tighter coil than the middle?
Yeah.
Even if you look between there, even the space of these next ones, it's not the exact same as, well, particularly down here. Right there, that space is not the same as that. This would be like a progressive rate, meaning the wider coils do most of the work, and then when they kind of bottom out, when they can't do any more of it, there's the tighter ones to pick up the slack. It's a spring meant for different type of terrain. It's meant to actually work at different levels. I can have a standard coil spring where all the spread is exactly the same. Look at the spring in this guy.
Standard. Is that one standard?
Yep. Good old regular standard issue coil spring. No variable rate, no progressive rate, just the exact same space between every coil. Okay. So they're my one type of spring. Here's my other type. Leaf spring. Why is it called a leaf spring?
The layers
Leaves of metal. Each one of these is a spring. And I layer them. The more leaves there are, the more springiness, for lack of a better word. Okay? And then on the table are the two other types that we're going to talk about. This is an air spring. And this, torsion bar spring. Okay. The way this one acts like a spring is the bar actually twists. That's why it's called torsion bar. Yes. As I torque it, it wants to spring back. Okay, so I'm going to play you guys a video on the torsion bar because I don't have anything in the lot that uses it. Okay. The torsion bar is pretty cool for a couple reasons. One, it's one of these only types of springs. By the way, springs control your ride height. When you talk about how high or low a vehicle sits, the main component that's going to control that is the springs and what they call the spring perches or the spring mounts. That's the main things that's going to do that job. Does that make sense? So, the more spring I have, more height. Less spring I have, less height. That's why you have nitwits who go out and cut their springs to lower their vehicle. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. Now, with the torsion bar, they had a part that went on the end of this, part of its mount. It was called the port chop. Guess why it was called the port chop?
Does it look like a pork chop?
Kind of looks like a pork chop. One side of the torsion bar would go into the control arm. One side would go into the pork chop. And the pork chop would have a screw in the end of it. And as you screwed it in, it pushed the end of the pork chop down, which guess what that did? It twisted the bar. And as this part of the bar twisted, look what it did to the other end. Which meant it pushed the control arm down. What did that do to the height of the vehicle? Made the vehicle want to go up. Okay? And then have my good old leaf spring. Now, one of the things about leaf springs, so first of all, this is where it all started. Okay. Now, one of the things, anybody's paying attention, when I step on it, what does the leaf spring want to do?
Spreads out.
Spreads. That's why that side, the mount on it, you notice how it's got two bolts?
Yeah.
By the way, this is called a shackle. One side was bolted directly into the frame. The other side had the shackle. The shackle is what moved a little bit so that as the leaf spring spreads out with weight going on it, it can flatten. Now, the leaf spring also has a couple other things. It's got these little plasticky discs in between. And on really old ones, they actually have leather in between them. Why would they do that?
For bushing. Maybe.
It'll be a clash
Okay.
of the metal smacking each other since it's
Even more than a bushing, which it does kind of do that job. It does do a little bit of vibration softening. Most of it is that. We didn't want customers complaining about ring, ding, 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 metal on metal on metal on metal on metal going down the road. So they put either leather or plastic so that it didn't do that. Now, if you notice, this has a straight bar at the bottom. This last leaf was often called an overload spring. Anybody want to take a guess why?
overload.
Yeah.
Reach max.
Hmm?
If it got down to that point, if it got to its maximum.
It doesn't do any work until you overload the main spring. It's just there hanging out, going along for the ride. That's why it's a straight piece. It doesn't help support any weight until all these curved leaves
Go flat.
are flat with it.
Okay. I was wondering why that was there.
Now, see that bolt down the center?
Yeah.
That's got two jobs. I'm gonna do that because I like that. That's comfy. That's called a center pin. Okay. When you have, the most common place you found leaf springs was on a solid axle. And
I'll get him first.
all right. So, all depending on the way it's set up, you might have the axle on the bottom of this. You might have the axle on the top of this. All depends on the way it's designed. Now the axle comes across. The axle has a spring perch on it. Guess what the spring does on the perch? What's a bird do on its perch?
Roost. It just sits.
Sits there. Technically, you're right, whoever said the word is roost. But We don't roost an axle, but it does sit on the perch. Okay. Basically, it's a flattened spot on the axle for the spring to go to. Now, once it's on there, I have to hold the spring to the axle. What's going to do that on a leaf spring setup is something called a U-bolt. The bolt looks like U. Perch is here. The U goes around this and through the perch. And it's threaded on both sides. Tighten the nut down. That way it almost acts like a clamp between the perch down here and the top of the U-bolt here. And you're going to have two of them on each side. Front of the axle, the back of the axle. Here's the problem. Anybody ever try to bolt two pieces of pipe together? Why have you never tried to bolt two pieces of pipe together? Why don't it sound like it would work? I agree with you. Why don't it sound like it would work? You ever tie two pieces of string together?
Yeah, you just get longer string.
You do, but what happens if you only put a knot in one of the two? Doesn't the string just slide?
Oh, yeah.
If I put U-bolts on this, that doesn't keep the axle in any other place other than side to side. It won't go side to side on me really much. But guess what? It'll slide up until what the other side of it will allow it to do. It'll shimmy and go. So I need something that on that spring perch locates it, sticks it together. Make sure that, kind of like Lego blocks. Put two of those wood blocks together, you know how they slide across each other? Stick two Lego blocks together, the little studs, grip them. That's your center pin, or your center bolt. Your center bolt's going to hold all the leaves together, but it's also going to hold it where it needs to be on the axle. Sometimes you'll go behind an old pickup truck, or maybe even an older 18-wheeler, and you'll see that its rear end, the front of it's here, but the rear end is like over here,
Yeah.
going down the road straight. It's got a name. We call it dog tracking. Because if you ever watch the dog run, dogs can't run straight. Their butt kind of goes to the side. Here's the deal. That center pin, when it breaks, guess what the axle does? And it usually doesn't just shift on one side. It'll tweak a little bit, depending on where the braking force is, where the thrust is. Okay? There's two other parts of this that can go bad that can cause dog tracking. This bushing. If the spring can go dunk, 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 forward and backwards, is that going to keep one side of the axle in line with the other? Which, by the way, what's the other part of this then that controls keeping it in line? Not just the shackle. If that shackle gets seized up, stuck, is this spring going to want to stay in line?
No.
So, now, what do you think the benefit of a leaf spring is? Come on, what do you think the benefits are?
It can hold more weight.
Yeah, I ain't a light guy, and he ain't got no problem. And this has only got 1, 2, 3 leaves. Okay? I am barely deflecting it. Leaf springs can hold a boat ton of weight.
They're normally put in trucks. They should.
Now, what do you think the likelihood of them needing any maintenance is? Very minimal. They only got so many moving parts, right? A bushing, a shackle, and really those sound deadeners or bushings between the leaves. That's it. What's the downside of them?
Heavy.
Huh?
Heavy.
Okay, that's going to be one. Because can our springs be part of our sprung weight, or are they going to be unsprung?
They're gonna be strongly.
Okay? To an extent, yes. They kind of go a little bit of both, really. Here's the problem, though. I'm going to have that weight vibrating, right? It's a lot of weight. Here's my other problem with a leaf spring. Are they more or less forgiving of bumps than a coil spring? Let's try an experiment.
Well, I feel like
What do
you
you mean
get
by
a
less
better
forgiving?
ride with coils.
Yeah, what do you mean by forgiving?
Yeah, like, do you mean like which gets
Like,
the
you're
swing
talking
weight?
about-
What absorbs more?
Oh, of course the
The
spring.
coil spring. The coil
Who
spring.
absorbed?
The coil spring.
Coil spring.
Okay.
I just needed to know what you were talking about by forgiving.
Here's my point. Leaf springs are where it all started. We've been using leaf springs since we've been using stagecoaches. Okay? But they don't absorb squat. They transition every bump, every bounce, every movement, right from the road to you. Now they'll support weight. That's why traditionally they were always used in trucks. I actually miss it. When I have my excursion, I had 4-wheel leaf spring. All 4 corners were leaf, front and rear. Now, I like that type of ride. My wife, on the other hand, did not enjoy that type of ride the most.
So in your
Okay.
excursion.
That was going down almost every road, okay? Every road was like Ace Ventura movie. Okay? Here's the deal. However, a lot of like your drag strip cars will still use these. They are heavy, but guess what they do really, really well?
Support.
Make the car really
Exactly.
deep.
They keep that rear tire pushed into the ground. Remember, what's suspension? I want to keep the wheels where I want it. Now, if I don't allow any give, it makes a really harsh ride. But if I don't really allow any give, isn't it going to force traction to go from the wheel to the road?
Yeah.
Or it's going to force a brake loose, one of the two. Okay? Make copies, or copies on my desk.
I gotta send the pictures to Ms. Jen, right?
Don't stress about the pictures, just make the copies of what you got. Alright, so. Now, because quite a few people are like my wife, and they don't like the Ace Ventura ride, we went to these. These were the next generation. Coil springs. Now, you will see a million variations of them. They have straight up coil springs. If you look on the back of the Crown Victoria, that's what you have. You have a straight up coil spring. You have a shock absorber over here. And these have a mount on the axle. They have a mount on the top. And the control arms, guess what the control arms do?
Keep them in.
Control.
They control how far the axle can move. So if the axle can only go so far down, it kind of keeps the spring captured. The control arms do not support the weight. They control it. That's why their name is a control arm, not a support arm. All the weight is held by this guy. Now, sometimes engineers make cars, they figure out, this car looks great, there's no room for crap. So now they gotta figure out a way to stick more stuff in a tighter space. So, you will see what's called a coilover spring. The coilover is when you have a shock absorber going straight down through it, and the spring mounts, at least the bottom mount is usually on the shock absorber somewhere. Okay?
So it's like that one.
Well, this one's a little different. This one's got some other couple pieces.
Coilovers are usually like skinny.
Yes. You know, one is
Yeah.
kind of like a coilover. It's not dead on. The thing about a coilover is the spring, even if it's got a mount on it, that mount still has to be bolted up into the body of it. Okay? As they're working through it, coilovers became like one of the first ways of, let me put everything in one spot. I'm putting a shock absorber in there and I'm putting a coil. Now, what's the difference between a coilover and this? This is a strut. Technically speaking, the thing that makes this not a coilover is, see this right here, the way it's mounted on? This is the upper control arm of the vehicle it's on. There is no upper control arm. Okay? You know what? My drawing sucks bad enough for going to ignore that.
Why not? I want a picture cut.
Oh, Picasso.
Come on, Van Gogh, you got this.
There's an old saying, a man must know his limitations. Alright? Now, does everybody agree that with a wheel, come in, wake up. With a wheel going down the road, see, that's why you gotta stay awake, man. As the wheel's going down the road, if I don't want it to do exactly what that's doing, where it's wobbling everywhere, I have to have something that's gonna hold it in place.
Yeah.
If it's a front wheel that steers, doesn't that same thing that's holding it in place have to let it go?
Left to right, yeah.
Okay. On heavy duty trucks and really old vehicles, they use something called a kingpin. That's where the term kingpin came from. Okay? For people who use it for major criminals. Kingpin was literally, you had it, the knuckle. We all know what the knuckle is now, right? Okay, so the knuckle's there. The knuckle is what actually has what we call the spindle. The spindle is the part that comes out that the wheel actually turns around. Now, spindle's on the knuckle. The knuckle's here. It used to be that they had what they called an I-beam suspension. You can thank Henry Ford for that.
Steering.
Yes. Because on the I-beam suspension, it was literally like this. Had a hole. And this part was hollowed out a little. Not completely hollow, it was just thinner metal. So it was an I-beam. The top and the bottom were thick, the middle was thin. And it had this rounded boss on the end of it. You had your knuckle, think of like a door hinge. You had your knuckle that had two holes in it. the two holes in the knuckle. Spindle that the wheel and bearings went on. Knuckle, there were the two holes in the knuckle, the bosses. And guess what I dropped down in it?
Kingpin.
A big pin. It's called the kingpin. That's what held the knuckle to the axle. First of all, that's a lot of weight. Second of all, it doesn't do real well when you go at high speed and try to turn. Guess what the I-beam does then? Yeah, it twists or it flips. Not good for modern vehicles. So now what we have is we have knuckle, spindle, and okay. Thank you. I'm glad you all have trust in my artwork. There's the frame of the vehicle. Okay? This is what we call a short arm, long arm. One arm is short, one arm is long. It's a short arm, long arm suspension. These are ball joints. They get rid of all the way to this kingpin. And it makes a big opening here so that if I have a front wheel drive vehicle or a four wheel drive vehicle, I can put an axle out through it. Whoa.
Amazing.
Yep. Now, back in the day when we used I-beams, I either put a leaf spring like this with a center pin down through it, or if you look on some really old hot rods, they actually did I should have done that upside down. They did a leaf spring in the middle. One leaf spring holding the whole steer axle. Now, see this upper ball joint? See how the spring goes from the frame to the control arm? Yes, kind of, sort of, maybe. If I take this away, I nix the control arm, and now I put this I get rid of the upper ball joint. The upper ball joint and the upper control arm go away.
Now he's got a strut on it.
Then this is a strut.
Oh. So like the places like this. I thought you were putting it on the second one. I was like, it's late. Just doesn't
Your
matter.
class down there? Did you get Wide to sign off?
Not yet.
before, get live before it comes to me. Because he knows if he's got space and guys to do it. So, I get rid of the upper ball joint, I get rid of the upper control arm. This does the supporting at the top. There's the difference between a coilover spring and a strut. A strut's actually supporting the wheel end. Coilover spring is not. Coilover spring, the car still has control arms. Okay? Now, one of the interesting things, think about it. What do those ball joints allow the knuckle to do? Pivot, turn. So if I get rid of one of those ball joints and I stick this guy in there, what's he got to allow? He's got to allow pivoting too. Does this look like a guy that turns at all?
Not really.
He's got 3 bolts up here, 2 bolts down here,
Pretty stiff.
except for, let me see if I got one-on-ones.
Oh, it does, so.
Ah.
So it can rotate.
The top of the tower's got a bearing in it. They don't all have that. They only have it if it's a steer axle strut. Technically, it's only supposed to be a strut if it's on the steer axle. You will see vehicles, though, more and more confuse the term coilover spring and strut. Meaning you'll see literature calling things on the back a strut. If it's a strut, it's really supposed to have that bearing plate. Because notice, if that bearing is bolted in, doesn't that then allow the whole strut to turn? Anybody ever hear an old minivan squeak when it turns?
Yes.
It's the bearing.
9 times out of 10, it's the bearing. Could be the ball joint at the bottom, but 9 times out of 10, it's this bearing cap right here.
Lack of lubrication.
More like water. I'd probably say more like water.
Well, actually, let's go take a look at some dynamics of this right here, right here.
Right on.
Let's go out. If somebody could momentarily stop my phone and bring that with us, that way we can video out there.
You want to do anything good?
Look, you got the knuckle right there. There's the lower control arm. Right up there is the strut.
This is the lower control arm?
Yep. Lower control arm is right here. There's your knuckle. And up there is the strut. Now, if you think about it, look where the strut is, look where you would be sitting. You're almost right on it. That's the reason why the strut in these, the top bearing plate tends to go bad. So much of the weight is right there on that bearing plate. That as the wheels are turning, we talked about this in steering. What takes more effort? Turning at a slow speed or turning at road speed?
Slow speed.
Slow speed. So how many people sitting there coming out of a parking spot? Think about it. You guys saw it on the big school van. What did the caster show you? What did the van do? Didn't they lean side to side? What do you think is bearing all that weight and wear? The struts and the strut bearings. All right. Now, while we're under here, this piece of metal, this huge chunk, that's your subframe. That's what the control arm bolts to. All right?
It's bolted like here.
Yeah, that's how I got mine when I got my control arm.
Your control arm?
It's like right there. It's like
Now, what we're going to do is we're also going to go, we're going to check out the rear real quick. All right.
Would this one rotate like how the front one rotates?
What do you mean?
Like how it pivots a little
No.
Now, so
bit? I
this,
see the missing piece here.
we have a solid rear axle. Okay, it's not a drive axle. There's no drive shaft, no differential, anything like that. I got coil springs. Okay, spring perch in the axle and a mount up in the frame there. Well, the body, but the body is the frame. Okay. Now, if you look, the knuckle is built in. It's not really a knuckle per se. It's built in. The rear spindles are built into the axle. Do you see that? That metal is all part of it. Now, what we have is we have a shock absorber. We have a control arm. And then we have a panhard bar. Okay? Or sometimes you'll hear it called a lateral bar or lateral torsion bar. Basically, the control arms that are down here keep the axle locked in forward and backwards. This way the whole axle doesn't just roll, flop. But that doesn't stop side to side play. And when we have it going down the road, we want it to go down the road straight. So notice this mounts up here, this mounts on the axle. That doesn't allow it to go side to side. Shock absorber, it's as simple as 2 bolts. One up there, one down here. Okay? If you were to take the spring out, guess what part you got to loosen up so you can get the springs out?
The knuckle.
Well, the knuckle doesn't come off so much back here. You would loosen the control arms. Remember, that's what controls the axle, right? So you would loosen them, you'd be able to drop the whole rear axle. Notice, everywhere there's a bolt. Because there's movement, there's also a bushing. So guess what? Whenever you check suspension components, guess what you're checking?
Bushing.
You're checking bushings. They are the most likely thing to go bad.
Where'd I say?
That rubber there, all that rubber right there. Okay, there's another bushing up there.
Somebody just farted.
All right. So here's the problem. If the spring's oscillating, what's your wheel doing?
Lifting off.
Your wheel's oscillating, which means it's lifting off the ground and going like this. Because remember, what does all the support of the vehicle? The springs. So since the springs are supporting the vehicle, and you have sprung weight, that weight would have a half-second delay before it would really even start to drop, which means the wheel's going to get pulled up. That whole thing's going to oscillate. So we got to have something that dampens those oscillations. That's the shock absorber. Now, the way you test the shock absorber is you're going to walk up to the car. On that corner of the car, you're going to push down. The state of Pennsylvania says the car is not allowed to go more than 3 times. Down, up, down, up, down, up. Without stopping. It has to stop within those 3 times.
It's like the old Cadillac.
Huh?
The old Cadillac and stuff.
Oh, Well, here's the thing, if they have a good shock absorber on them, they're still gonna stop in that amount of time. Now, it'll take them a full 3, don't get me wrong. But they'll stop within 3. Regardless of what vehicle it is, if it doesn't stop within the 3, if it goes at 4, 5 bounces, or, I've seen this, worse yet, you go down,
And they'll come back up.
and they don't come back up at all.
That's,
I've seen that, by the way.
That's a broken
Look.
lowrider there.
Well, actually, you don't have a bad shock, because if you have a bad shock, you're going to get the. If you go down and it stays down, either the spring or the mounts are busted. Okay? Now, the strut here is going to include multiple components. Obviously, I got the spring. I also have a shock absorber in here. Okay, that's what the center piece is. I have spring mounts, a lower and an upper. I also have what they call a bellows, or a dust boot. That's the corrugated, rubbery, plasticky thing in the middle. Okay, that's there to keep dust and dirt off the nice, shiny centerpiece.
That needs to be worked.
Actually, hold on, you get up there, I don't want to talk about you again. There, that nice, shiny centerpiece. Because guess what that's going to ride against? It's going to ride against seals. That's going to ride against the seals on the inside of the shock absorber part. And we'll talk in a minute about how a shock absorber works, but I got oil and seals involved. So if that gets cut, nicked, dirty, what's that going to do to the seals when it goes by? It's going to rip up the seals. Then the shock absorber part does a whole lot of nothing. Now, the part I didn't want to talk about, I do want to, get down here again. See that red foam rubbery part I just pulled? That's called the jounce bumper. Jounce, Jounce. That's the part, when this bottoms out, when this collapses all the way that it can, that's the last bit that's supposed to kind of cushion it, so it's not just a metal on metal hit. Even more than that, it would almost be like the bushings on the end. Okay? Particularly on the shackle side. So like when the shackle would hit its full extent and it can't go any further, the bushing is what's supposed to absorb most of the vibration for you and kind of make it so it's not just metal on metal. There's the jounce bumper. Now, old school, and what your book will still talk about, oh, by the way, last component, the bearing plate at the top. Okay. Old school, what we used to do was you would put this guy in one of those compressors, you would squeeze the spring, put it under tension, and then you would take an impact gun, and there's a nut down in the center of this, so you can pass it around so you can see all the components I was just talking about. You would blast the nut in the center of it off, and that would allow you to take the bearing cap off. It would allow you to take the top mount of the spring off. It would allow you to take the isolator, which is the bushing-like material on the top of the spring. And then it would allow you to take the bellows boot off, then the bumper. Then you're just left with the shock absorber part of it. And then what you would do when you were changing a strut is you would get a new shock absorber part,
And put everything back on.
put all the old crap back on the new shock absorber part. However, that is quite possibly the most dangerous operation you can do of anything we talked about in this class. Okay? If you go to Harbor Freight, AutoZone, Pep Boys, you'll probably find something like this.
Yeah.
They sell them as a set of two of them. You put one on like this.
That just sounds like the original musical teeth. It slips out.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a second here. We're going to go over
That's what my
safety concern.
Huge safety concern. It's a spring, a huge spring. It comes off. You're dead.
So you would put one on like that, and then you would put the other one on the other way. You know, with the one hook here and the two down here. And you notice how they both have a nut. You would tighten it, and you would keep tightening it. And you would tighten this one a little bit. And then you would tighten the other one a little bit, and you keep going back and forth until you tighten the spring down in the two of these. These are an O-poop tool. They're an O-poop tool because anybody who's ever worked with them will tell you, actually, if you even look at it,
doesn't look very.
It is not stable at all.
how straight's that look?
Zero.
Not as much as a rainbow.
It looked like it's going this way.
It is. These will very commonly,
Break on.
a couple of things will happen. The threaded rod here, especially if it's cheap, import, the rod will bend. The threads might strip off. I've had one of the, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it was probably one of only 2 times I've nearly crapped myself working on stuff. Luckily, both times on my own vehicle, not on customer. I've had one of these where the fingers that hold this spring snapped while I was working on it. Okay?
It goes passed around.
I lost, the only other time I've nearly pooped myself was actually on the alignment rack out there. I was working here alone one day and the trolley jack got stuck. It was uneven. It was on its locks. One lock was out, holding, the other one wasn't. I couldn't get the locks to unlock because it wouldn't go up.
Without going down.
Well, you couldn't get it to go down because the one side was locked. The other side, and this is the trolley jack, not the full rack. I had my truck up on it. So basically, the only way to get the trolley jack to work and level out again was to get the one lock to pop back in. But it wouldn't go up, which meant you couldn't take weight off of it. So it was stuck in this crooked thing, and I wasn't able to get the one lock off. So I did the only thing that I could do, which was I took a crowbar, I knelt as low as I could, put the crowbar up to the lock, and whacked it with a hammer to force the lock to go back in, which then promptly dropped the truck 6 inches.
He was scary.
It did whack me in the head. Luckily, I was low enough that it was just a love tap.
And he had a hard hat on, most likely.
I wish I did. I did not. Also working on my truck at one point, I was trying to get it out and had the front of my truck has a small leveling kit on it. So basically a lift kit on the front axle. Has a lift kit on the front axle because most pickup trucks are built with what they call a rake. A rake means the ride height at the front is lower than the ride height at the back. Why are certain vehicles built with a rake?
When you put
There's one
weight-
of 2 reasons why.
When you put weight in the bed, I like
There's the functional reason. Pickup trucks are built with a rake because they're really supposed to be driven around with stuff in the bed. However, most of us in America now no longer drive pickup trucks around with stuff in the bed all the time. They've become essentially,
The minivan for working men.
yeah.
The minivan for
Okay.
working man.
So, if you don't want your truck constantly leaning down, you can put a leveling kit on the front, raise the front about 2.5 inches. Now, the downside to that is, the whole reason why we use struts and ball joints and things are because we're trying to put more stuff in a tighter spot. So if I'm gonna raise it up, guess what I just did to my space? I tightened it up even more. So to try to get the old struts that were worn out, I was trying to put these in so I could compress the spring, which meant I would have room to wiggle the strut. While working on it, inside the truck, I have one on one side, one on the other side, doing it, and all of a sudden I heard a noise, and I backed up. And within about 3 seconds, boom! Sounded like a gunshot. This part right here completely broke. It just snapped. The metal literally snapped and ripped out. So, Mr. Bond, why are you walking through my room?
I don't know what you're talking about.
So, if you decide to ever use these,
Don't.
Might as well just put your face under the spring.
good luck, Godspeed, I warned you otherwise.
Good luck, guys.
Good luck, Godspeed. I warn you otherwise. Just don't do it, man.
Now, the slightly better alternative is these. These are what you'll get from, Snap-on, Matco. You also get, there's like, this one's American Forge and Foundry. You'll get them from a slightly higher quality tool vendor than that. The other advantage of these are you don't get 2 of these per spring. You get 1. So what you do,
Oh, okay.
you work these out to the right size, you'll hook them over. And you can see, these have fingers. They also have safety pins. So once you get them in, you work the safety pin out so that the coil is caught. And on this side, you'll turn the screw. And it'll do the same idea job. It'll clamp down using the jaws, pulling them together. It is slightly better because you're turning 1 screw, not 2. So it should pull fairly nice and even. The thing to worry about on these is where these grips connect to the tool.
Because can't they bend?
They can bend and they can break, they're welded. So, most of the time now, in most shops, now dealerships might still make you move stuff around. Most shops are going to get now, though, what's called a quick strut. Meaning, you will remove this entire assembly. You will throw out this entire assembly. And you will put in a whole new assembly. Okay?
We're not doing a test on that, right?
What?
You're doing exactly what you
I don't make you guys, because of the fact that, here's the thing. If you go back even 5-6 years ago,
It's still pretty dangerous.
Well, it's not the danger aspect. What it was, the shock absorber. Now think about it. You're talking about an hour of labor. Getting all this out of the car, putting it in the wall compressor, which is the safest way to do it. Disassemble, put the new strut piece in, and then reassemble the bearing plate and everything else. We were talking about a good hour of labor. But it made sense because these were so inexpensive compared to the whole thing. Quick struts have become the way most people are doing it because they can do it in their driveway. Any shop can do it. You don't need specialty tools. You can do it with hand tools. You take the wheel off, you take 2 bolts out there, 3 bolts out there, 3 nuts, 2 bolts, so 5 fasteners, and I'm throwing him away. No, not coilovers. You're going to put another strut in. You got it. Why can't I put a coilover in? What's this take the place of? Upper control arm. Will coilover take the place of the upper control arm?
No, it will not.
Nope.
It has to work with the upper controller.
So, there is one other weird type of, now this. Everything in one package like this is called a McPherson strut. There is one other very weird system out there. I've seen Honda use it occasionally. I've seen Hyundai use it occasionally, where the spring is not on this, but everything else that's here is here. The spring is put over separate,
Oh, yeah.
but this is all still here. What did you say it's called?
I don't know what it's called, but I've heard of it before. I've seen it.
It's called, it actually has a name. It's a modified McPherson. So if you talk about a modified McPherson, you're talking about this whole setup, but the spring is separate. But you still have a strut assembly, because you have a bearing cap, you have,
Some of it is close, like
what was that?
the shock absorber and basically.
Well, again, here's the thing. What made this a strut? There's no, what? No upper ball joint, no upper control arm. This is it. So when this is all still here, doing the work of an upper control arm, but the spring is off of it, it's a modified McPherson. The other situation you have is you have what's on the Crown Vic. The Crown Vic has Crown Vic's got this up on the front. What is this? This is a coilover. What's the difference between this and that?
That's what you
The
want,
bolts?
you still have control.
I still need both control arms, right? My upper and my lower is still there. Now, it's still not a true
Strut.
SLA because a short arm, long arm, remember the spring supported one of the arms. Spring's not supporting an arm here, is it? So it's kind of like a strut, but it's not exactly because it mounts like a shock absorber. Okay? But technically, it's not the classic definition of a strut because what does it not do? It doesn't act like part of the control arm. Stop. All right. The last one, before I show you guys some of the videos of where these are, where some of these fit in, especially like the torsion bar, and the leaf spring, and this, because I don't have them in the lot. Almost everything I have out there is some variation of coil spring strut. That is by far the most common. This, however, is in growing popularity. Air suspension. Why do you think air suspension is growing in popularity?
Because it's easier to install.
It's easy to install, and actually, Kareem, let's take your comment and take it one step further. Not only can it do everything, but what,
The computer does everything.
that's where I was gonna go with this. What to do everything that this, or command everything the computer can. See, here's the problem. On all these other suspension types, there are some things the computer can do, especially on the struts. Because I can have an electronically controlled strut, believe it or not. I can make the strut stiffer or softer electronically. But can I make it really change height much? I can make it change height a little bit. Like 1/8 of an inch, 1/2 an inch. But that's it, that's all that can do. You have a car that has sport mode on it, with the dial. 1/8 of an inch to 1/2 inch, it'll lower it. Drop the center of gravity.
Really?
Yep.
I'm trying, when I get my car.
It'll also, well, 1/2 inch on a whole vehicle,
You won't notice.
you don't even notice. The other thing is, it stiffens the strut. It makes the fluid in the strut thicker.
Okay.
The strut's got oil in it.
Yeah.
What they'll do when it's an electronic strut is it's what we call magnetic resonance, MR. They'll actually put iron shavings in the oil, and when I send electricity down to it, it makes a magnet. When it makes a magnet, all those iron shavings line up. When they line up, it makes the fluid thicker. And so, that resists collapsing more. So when I put it in sport mode, just like I told you, drag strip with this, the wheels are pushed into the asphalt harder because there's less give. Right? Let's go to this guy. With air suspension, my computer can actually control the vehicle raising or dropping, making a change of over 9 inches. Not my particular, but the newest variations of them.
Did you order 5 boxes or something?
Yes.
Something.
I know.
I mentioned Crown Vic belt.
There you go. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
You too. All right.
Aloes
Yes.
here for our Christmas tree.
Diameter wise, good?
I think that should be good.
Let me know. If not, we get you slightly bigger.
That can be the star.
Slightly smaller.
But I don't know if I got. I might have one.
Second to the left.
Get that one right there. Under.
Now,
Under.
this guy right here.
think back to
The one in your hands is better than
Always
this.
fall out tired.
Toilet water in there doesn't signal.
Got you, bro. Well, so
Bro, look at the floor.
Thank you.
Yep. I don't know. Work in progress, because most of this morning I was bouncing among 2 other classes. They're here now, but they weren't here this morning, was staying alive. So I didn't even get to start on that yet. I'm gonna try, I can't promise. Alright. So, air suspension has the availability that the computer could use to do all sorts of things with it. Okay, I'm actually going to show you, they have some, Bose, the same people who make the speakers and sound systems, actually came up with an air suspension as well. It's what they call an active suspension. You guys did a little bit with active suspension and steering before, you did task sheet. This one's going to go even further. So let me show you some of this.
What's the video with GLE on before you can drive on the street?
Man, that's why I buy it. Bro, I want my suspension to be so good. I want it to be like rocking in a boat. And be like, look,
How badly out of bounds was that tire?
Very
New tire, it's got
Very?
10 ounces of weight, so.
Some shit.
Wow.
Y'all be making every good job fuck think you're in a relationship. What we put laughing. That bitch, that's you.
Yeah, it's so funny. Everybody really thinks juice babies that.
Let's go Cowboys.
did they do the spanking or get spanked?
Look, we're trying to give y'all the NFC, but y'all don't want it. Don't mess it up.
We're trying to give it to y'all first.
I said, man, that's somebody I tried to do that. We tried to do that.
so nice. Y'all giving it?
Yeah, but it's still they giving it to right. Back and forth, back and forth.
Our high school team came through. So listen, y'all better not lose to Eli Manning.
We already lost to the Dolphins. It'll get worse than that.
Lost to the Dolphins. I forgot about that for it.
We usually got like 2 games after that.
All right,
Let's see if maybe it'll work. It'll work backwards.
might work as well. I can't wait to go play that music from it.
Also, the suspension system.
Yeah, suspension by boss.
24 years ago,
Really feel the
what
bass.
it hoped would be a revolutionary electromagnetic suspension system that would offer an incredibly smooth ride for cars. The secret project was called Project Sound.
You should be able to build a car that basically flies along the ground, stays level all the time. So when you get to a bumpy road, it's going to stay level, and when you turn it's ready to stay level. When we started the project, we actually started with electric command. So we bought 2, we put one to the side, and we modified the other. This is the unmodified vehicle. That's what we're starting with. And it's going to come down to very speed, and it's going to make a hard turn, lane change, and then we're going to do a very hard braking. Then it'll come over these bumps, and it'll slalom down. So now the white car, same make, same model, same everything, except completely modified suspension system.
Yeah, that was a nice, quiet stopping. Damn. Yo, it aided.
We'll bring the cars down one after the other at a.
It's just gonna go over.
To finish the demo, Bose gives us a look at a springy hatchback.
That's all that air in them suspensions.
That's a fun way to show off how high-tech and powerful the suspension system is.
What? It looked like it hopped over it.
They say you.
You know, it's funny, right?
They said I'm jumping, bro.
What? That's crazy.
Yo, a hurdle.
Never repeat the trick, never tell them how you did it.
In the end, the project was a technical success, but a commercial failure. The suspension system was either too heavy and too expensive to integrate into mainstream vehicles. Bose was able to use what it learned from the project to create a special car seat for truckers called the Bose Drive. Bose says it sold lots of seats, but still enriched the product for them.
Oh, that's actually crazy. Yo, they're gonna stop at the strip.
The car jumped over a bar.
Stop right over it.
The speed bump.
When are they gonna start putting that on like cars? Or is that just Bose keeping it to themselves?
Well, like I said, Bose has determined it was not cost effective for them. But, I'm gonna show you some of the things from some of the new pickup trucks that actually get into air suspension.
Hello, this is Larry Thomas from Superlift Suspension. Here's a quick lesson in Suspension 101. Lesson 1, torsion bar suspension. The word torsion means twisting motion at one end of an object whose other end is held still or fixed. In this case, the torsion bar is your spring. This is a torsion bar. The torsion bar is made of spring steel. It runs longitudinally or lengthwise of the vehicle, attaches to the lower A-arm at the front, and attaches to the torsion bar key mount at the chassis mount or at the cross mount. As you twist or adjust or crank up the torsion key, it twists the torsion bar. As you twist the torsion bar, it twists the lower A-arm down. Because the upper and lower control arms are connected at the knuckle, they both twist. Thus, the torsion bar key is a fixed position that is held still or still, and the A-arm is a twist motion. After the wheel and tire push upward or droop downward, the torsion bar stringiness forces the suspension to return to its proper position. Make sure you adjust the torsion bar to the proper height, or you'll create a bind at the front ball joint. Over cranking the torsion bar to gain extra lift height will cause a harsh ride or premature component wear. That was a quick and easy lesson. If you have any questions about Superlift products, go to superlift.com or just give us a call. You can also check out the live chat that we have now.
That's his selfie drone.
Hey guys, I'm Jimmy with One Road. Today we're giving the 2003 Chevrolet Suburban a little bit of a lift by installing these torsion keys made by...
By the way, now granted, that's a specialized variation, but that's the pork chop.
Yeah.
So, the one side of the torsion bar is up in your control arm, the lower control arm. The other side fits in that. He's going to show it to you on the vehicle, but see this side here? A screw goes through that. Now, the bolt that goes through that is going to push that down, which is going to twist the bar. When it twists the bar is going to twist its whole length, and it's going to twist the control arm, thus pushing the control arm down, which does what to the vehicle? Pushes the vehicle up.
Engine Max called MaxCam. These torsion keys are unique, and you can see they actually have an internal cog. If you look closely, there is letters on the cog, and there's also numbers that go around the outside of the torsion key there. And by reading the directions, you can dial in exactly the amount of lift that you want. Now, as with most trucks, this thing has a little bit of a rake on the front end. In order to check the height, what we're gonna do is measure from the floor to the bottom of the fender well. We're just gonna take our tape measure.
By the way, one of the things you ought to be checking on most vehicles, at least quickly, when you do an alignment, is ride height. Guess what he just told you how to do?
I want to check ride height.
And go ahead and place it on the center line of the tire and measure up to the bottom of your fender flare. And in this case, we're sitting exactly at 35 inches. Now, if we do the same thing to this rear, we're at the center line of the tire, and in the rear, we're at 36.5, literally exactly. So we're gonna go ahead and call it, that's 1.5 inches of front end rake, and I don't want that. I recently put this new set of wheels and tires on the Suburban, and I figured I needed to finish the look by raising the front end just a little bit. One thing to note here, other than your standard jack and jack stands, you're gonna need a specialty tool to complete this job.
All right, I'm going to pick this up after lunch break. Let's go to lunch.
Oh, this would be hot. Got it.
Yeah.